Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 2017 Eaton Lecture. My name is William Crawley. I'm a journalist with the BBC. Didn't really think I was an expert in urban geography until tonight. We'll just see how that goes. It's my great pleasure to be here, a proud alumnus of Queen's University, to introduce the evening and also to invite you to take part. Because in addition to our distinguished guest who'll be speaking to us tonight, we'll also have a panel of experts responding, and we want your expertise, advice, and consultation, free of charge, when we get to that point in the evening. So I hope you will join in the conversation. Don't just sit there. Please get involved, and let's make this a conversation about this place and the world. Some great ideas are going to be offered in this space tonight. And the Eaton Lecture is really important because we celebrate also the relationship between Northern Ireland and Belfast and Canada. Timothy Eaton was a son of Ulster who travelled from Ballymena, immigrant, economic migrant, we would say today, to Canada. A couple of years ago, I made a documentary about him and visited the Eaton department stores in Toronto, and we looked at the importance of the Eaton catalogue, which really revolutionised the retail industry, not just in Canada, but around the world. While I was there, I also interviewed on television in the Brave New World series the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, who is a daughter of Belfast, born in Belfast and lived here until the age of 3 and then became herself an immigrant. So extraordinary connections. Toronto, of course, was once described as the Belfast of Canada. We're hoping after tonight that Belfast will become the Toronto of Northern Ireland. Who knows? We might get some of that. You know, and look at their Prime Minister in Canada these days. Wouldn't that be great? Amazing. The possibilities are endless. So without further ado, I hope you will join in the conversation when we get to it. Let me welcome to introduce our distinguished guest tonight, the President and Vice-Chancellor of Queen's University, Patrick Johnston. Please welcome him.
Thanks, William. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to see so many of you here for the Eaton Lecture, the 2017 Eaton Lecture at the Centre of Canadian Studies, which is part of the School of Natural Built Environment and supported by our Chief Executives Club. I would like to especially welcome Greg Houlihan, Minister Councillor at the High Commission of Canada in London, who's flown in today to be here with us, and also our Lord Mayor of Belfast, Alderman Brian Kingston, and I think the US Consul General Daniel Lawton is somewhere in the audience too, so you're all very welcome. Of course, a very special welcome today to Queen's and indeed to Belfast, Northern Ireland. It's his first time here. Our guest speaker for this evening, Professor Meric Gertler, and I have no doubt we're going to have a really entertaining evening, and indeed, as William has said, thought-provoking as well. He's accompanied by Nadina Jameson, Vice President for Strategic Initiatives at the University of Toronto, and I'd like to welcome her back to Belfast. She told me that her father actually is a graduate of geography here, so there's a full circle come around, Nadina. Also, our panel of experts, I'd like to welcome them. Professor Bjorn Hashim from Lund University, Kevin Morgan from Cardiff University, Suzanne Wiley, Chief Executive of Belfast City Council, Joanne Stewart from Catalyst NI, and also Dr. Linda Fox-Rogers from Queen's and from the school, who will also be part of our panel. And of course, finally, thanks to William. Yet again, William is a great friend of the university as well as being an alum, and we really appreciate the fact that he is chairing this evening's session. As William has already said, we're very proud of the Eaton Lecture series. It's now the 24th year of this series, and it's made possible by a gift to Queen's by Dr. Fred Eaton. The lecture series, of course, commemorates the establishment of the Tea Eaton Company in Canada, founded by Tim Eaton from Ballymena, and it was founded in 1869. And it's really thanks to the Eaton family's generosity and their very generous endowment that we have this opportunity each year to reflect on the business and community links and social links between Northern Ireland and Canada, and the issues of relevance and importance to both our societies. And indeed, when President Gertler and myself were just chatting this afternoon over a number of the key challenges that we have as presidents of universities, it was remarkable how similar some of those challenges indeed are. Unfortunately, Dr. Eaton himself could not be with us this evening, but in his absence, I would like to acknowledge and thank him and indeed the Eaton family for their vision and ongoing contribution and connection to this university and the importance that they attach to the Canada relationship with Queen's. Given the Canada theme to this lecture series, and of course our guest keynote speaker today, it is of course very appropriate that we had the pre-lecture refreshments in our Canada room upstairs, which really in some respects really symbolises that relationship. The Canada room reflects this university's links with Canada. It was redesigned in 1986. It is panelled in Canadian maple, decorated with the coat of arms of Canada and the Canadian provinces. And some of you, I'm sure, noticed also that the carpet and the light features also have the maple leaf. And it's one of our prime rooms within the university and one which really symbolises the importance we attach to the relationship with Canada. But our relationship goes much deeper than that. There are currently around about 800 Queen's alumni that live in Canada, indeed 400 that live in the Ontario-Ottawa area, and indeed when I go and do events in Toronto, we always have a very significant number of people who actually come to those. In the 1960s in particular, we had many medical graduates and indeed dental graduates who went to further their careers in Canada, and many of those have been very, very big supporters of the university and continue to do so. Among them, a notable Queen's graduate was Dr. John Savage, who was the former Premier of Nova Scotia. So our alumni have actually contributed to Canada over many, many years in many different walks of life, from medicine to higher education to the oil and energy sector and many others. Queen's was officially recognised as a Centre for Canadian Studies in 1986, and the reason was to really encourage research and education and teaching links between this university and Canada. Queen's School of Natural Built Environment also has an exchange agreement with the University of New Brunswick and its interdepartmental archaeology programme, with exchange students from here and there going back and forward. We also enjoy a wide range of partnerships and collaborations which span both higher education institutions, but also business and industry, academia, philanthropy and culture, and including, of course, a collaborative agreement with Bombardier, the Canadian-owned business. And of course, we hope to deepen those links even further and indeed explore how we might even deepen those with the University of Toronto. Only in November last year, I had the pleasure of meeting the High Commissioner for Canada to the UK, Her Excellency Ms. Janice Charette, and we were delighted that this was the first higher education institution that she came to visit on her appointment, and really reaching out to see how we could develop deeper relationships. And her colleague Greg Houlihan is here this evening. So this evening's lecture then is all about partnerships. And partnerships have never, ever been more important in society. And it's about partnerships for prosperity, partnerships between universities and urban regions. This university has a very long, deep and proud tradition of contributing to the development of Belfast and indeed to Northern Ireland, and plays a very vital role in the growth of a sustainable knowledge economy here, by ensuring that people have the necessary skills, knowledge, support base to actually grow a regional economy that can be globally competitive. With over 3,750 staff, we are, of course, one of this city's largest employers, contributing $1 billion to our local economy and supporting close to 10,000 full-time jobs across Northern Ireland. We work now very closely with Belfast City Council and with Suzanne and her team, and very much an active partner now as she drives forward the Belfast agenda with very ambitious vision, which I know we'll hear about, and targets for the city, again thinking in a global context. And in fact, this lecture and discussion are very timely in my view, because we're all probably finalising our response to her agenda and how we actually take that forward. And I've no doubt we're going to learn a lot more this evening on the role of universities and how they can play a major role in helping their cities, their regions prosper, from our keynote speaker. We are very honoured to have Professor Meric Gertler, President of the University of Toronto, here today to deliver the 2017 Eaton Lecture. In 2013, Professor Gertler began his term as the 16th President of the University of Toronto. He had previously served as the Dean of the University's largest and most diverse academic division of the Faculty of Arts and Science. He's internationally renowned as a distinguished scholar. His research focus on the geography of innovative activity and the economics of city regions have rippled right across the world and, of course, in Canada. He has served as an advisor to local, regional, national governments in Canada, the United States and Europe, as well as to international agencies such as the OECD and also the European Union. He was the founding co-director for the Programme on Globalization and Regional Innovation Systems at the Monk School of Global Affairs and served as the director of the Department of Geography's Programme and Planning, holding the Goldring Chair in Canadian Studies. His research has attracted $8.4 million funding, and he has published 9 books. In 2015, Professor Gertler was appointed to the Order of Canada, a most prestigious accolade, in recognition of his research in urban geography, notably for his influential studies of innovation, technology, and development in cities. He brings a wealth of experience and reputation for innovation and entrepreneurship, and like everyone else in this audience, I'm really looking forward to hearing his thoughts on the role of universities and key partners in the development of urban regions. Without further delay, can I ask Meric to come to the podium?
Well, thank you for a wonderful introduction and a very warm welcome. So I'd like also to begin by paying tribute to the Eaton family. As you have already heard, Timothy Eaton was born some 25 miles from here in Ballymena and went on to revolutionize the retail industry both in Canada and indeed around the world. And I'm so pleased that his family's legacy and generosity have not only made this lecture series possible, but created the means for me to come to Belfast for the very first time. And it is a lovely university and a lovely city. That same spirit of generosity has characterized the kind of hospitality that I have received from President and Vice-Chancellor Patrick Johnston, as well as Dr. Niall Majuri, and many other members of this wonderful university, all of whom have so warmly welcomed me here to this beautiful and vibrant university and city. So thank you all. Speaking of Belfast's beauty and vibrancy actually provides a nice segue to the subject of my address today. But let me begin with a caveat. Getting a clear understanding of Northern Ireland's political and economic circumstances is a daunting undertaking for a visitor these days. There seem to be as many opinions as there are pundits. One media outlet describes the economy as, quote, scraping along the bottom, while another describes the region as thriving and outperforming the other UK countries, including England, in many key performance indicators. And then, of course, Brexit complicates everything. So I will not pretend to be an expert on the politics or the economy of Belfast or Northern Ireland. Instead, what I propose to do is to share with you the views of a curious outsider who's looking at the bigger picture, considering some of the global trends and forces that are shaping urban regions, with some reflections on how they might be playing out here, as well as in some other places. As you've gathered from the generous introduction just a few minutes ago, back when I had more time to be a scholar, I focused much of my attention on studying the economies of urban regions and the role that major institutions such as research universities play in the development of those city regions. So while these days I have much less time for research, instead I find myself in a different role as a more active agent promoting a greater understanding and a deeper appreciation of this relationship between universities and cities and fostering a closer relationship. And so it's in this spirit that I will argue today that places like Queen's University Belfast and its host city region provide a striking demonstration of an increasingly important global phenomenon. In regions around the world, from Boston to Beijing to Belfast, to my own home of Toronto, the partnership between research-intensive universities and their host city regions is a fundamental, mutually beneficial catalyst for innovation, resilience, and prosperity. My argument will be that the presence of an outstanding institution of higher education and research, such as Queen's University Belfast, has helped strengthen and transform the city of Belfast and the surrounding region in very positive ways, and continues to do so, just as similar institutions have done in other celebrated examples around the world. There's a reciprocal effect too. Vibrant urban regions provide an essential foundation for universities to thrive. The relationship, like all good partnerships, is indeed symbiotic. However, I'm not going to concentrate on this aspect today. Instead, I will focus my remarks on the role that universities play in staking their host regions to success and prosperity over the long run. The benefits and opportunities Queen's has afforded Belfast will likely come as no surprise to the audience here today. At least I hope it won't. But policymakers and civic leaders and the general public often tend to discount or overlook the important role that institutions of advanced research and higher education play in promoting a region's or even a nation's prosperity. So my aim today is really to help correct this. I'm going to argue that there are at least 3 ways in which research-intensive universities like Queen's propel regional innovation, prosperity, and reinvention. First, research universities impart dynamism and resilience to the economies of their host urban regions. Second, such universities are tremendously important stabilizing forces in urban economies and in the local neighborhoods that they inhabit. And third, I will argue that research universities are gateways. They connect their host regions to the world and vice versa, and in doing so, they become vital players in the formation of global knowledge-producing and problem-solving networks. So let me take each point in order, and I'm going to begin the discussion of dynamism and resilience with a story about a place some 3,000 miles from here. This is a photograph of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Bethlehem was once the second largest steel-producing town in the United States. Astonishingly, in 1941, Bethlehem produced more steel than the entire United Kingdom. In 1943 alone, Bethlehem supplied the steel for 380 Navy and cargo ships built in shipyards on the east coast of the United States. That's more than a ship a day. The image on this slide is one of Walker Evans' iconic photos of Bethlehem. It was taken in 1935 when Evans was working for the U.S. Farm Security Administration. Here's a photo from the same street taken just recently from a Google Maps car. Perhaps not quite as artistic. The trees are taller, the cars are a little different, but the scene is remarkably similar. Indeed, the population of Bethlehem hasn't changed very much from its high point in 1960. Of course, we all know what has happened to Bethlehem's leading industry. As you can see, what has happened to the U.S. share of global production of crude steel. Rather striking pattern. The city of Bethlehem is belatedly struggling to reinvent itself as a bit of an arts and tourism destination, but with what one might have to call mixed results. But while Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and dozens of similar Rust Belt cities have struggled as a result of the similar kind of shifting geography of steel production, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, not that far away, with a similar industrial heritage, has thrived. Today, Pittsburgh is a leader in healthcare, education, technology, and financial services. While steel still plays an important part in Pittsburgh's economy, the city has dramatically diversified and reinvented itself over the past 50 years. So why is this experience half a world away relevant to Belfast? Well, I would say that in many ways, Belfast is Pittsburgh. think this is a familiar image to people in this city. To take one example, consider that by the time the Titanic was built, not very far from here, Belfast had two of the largest and most successful shipyards in the world. In its heyday, Harland and Wolff alone employed nearly 35,000 people in shipbuilding. And even as recently as 1975, the shipyard was massive. However, as with steel production in the US, we know the history of shipbuilding in the UK. This chart shows the top 5 shipbuilding countries in the world in 1910, as measured by their share of global completions in gross tonnage. And here are the world's top 5 shipbuilding countries in 2015. If you can't make out the country on top, it's China, followed by South Korea, Japan, Philippines, and then Taiwan. So clearly there has been a sea change in shipbuilding over the past century. And yet, while there undoubtedly have been challenges, Belfast continues to reinvent itself. From the global capital of linen production in the 1870s, called Linenopolis, to the birthplace of the Titanic in the early 20th century, to the new Titanic Quarter today, as seen in this slide, Belfast has been remarkably resilient. So why have Pittsburgh and Belfast and Toronto and Boston and London and so many others reinvented themselves while places like Bethlehem and so many others have struggled? Well, there are, of course, a multitude of explanations. Astute investment decisions by governments and the business community, as well as advantageous locations, are no doubt important. But most important, I would argue, has been the presence of a well-educated, dynamic, and creative population. Above all, Belfast has benefited from the propulsive effect of the region's educational institutions, whose graduates have formed the backbone of an educated, diversified, and highly creative workforce for years, over 170 years in Queen's case. This slide shows some of Queen's pharmacy graduates from last year, I believe. Just as Pittsburgh has benefited tremendously from the impact of Carnegie Mellon University, the University of Pittsburgh, and other local universities, the ability of Belfast to reinvent itself can be explained in large part by the local impact of Queen's University and other local institutions of higher education and research. Similarly, city regions like Boston and San Francisco have benefited from the influence of MIT, Harvard, Stanford, UC San Francisco, Berkeley, and dozens of smaller, less famous schools. And the pattern is repeated in Canada, in places like Toronto, with the University of Toronto and other institutions of higher education and research in the city. The same is true overseas, with particularly striking examples such as Singapore, which demonstrate the profound economic and social impact of strategic and deliberate and sustained public investment in higher education and research. Throughout much of its history, Belfast's proximity to markets and supply centers in the UK and Europe, an extraordinary natural harbor, and easy access to shipping routes of the Atlantic helped drive prosperity. These factors still matter a great deal to the local economy, but now I would rank the presence of Queen's University Belfast and other local institutions of higher education and research at the top of the list of local assets. One way to see this is to reflect on the story of Belfast's aerospace industry. Short Brothers plc, as you probably know, was founded in London in 1908 and was the first company to manufacture commercially and to sell aircraft. The company moved to Belfast in 1936 and partnered with Harland and Wolff in building aircraft. In 1989, the Canadian firm Bombardier Aerospace acquired Shorts and established a major high-value, high-complexity production presence in Belfast. Today, Bombardier Aerospace employs close to 5,000 people in Belfast and is the largest manufacturing company in Northern Ireland. Now, I'm not going to gloss over Bombardier's recent global reorganization and the resulting redundancies here and around the world. There are anxieties, not least in Canada, over the challenges that Bombardier faces in a very competitive, capital-intensive industry. There are positive signs too. For example, Bombardier Belfast has recently won a $467 million contract to build regional jets for CityJet of Dublin. But regardless of Bombardier's future, Laurent Baudouin, Bombardier's chairman emeritus, and I should mention an honorary graduate of both of our institutions, indicated that a major factor in Bombardier's decision to locate in Belfast in the first place was the presence of a highly skilled workforce and world-class institutions of higher education and advanced research. Whatever the future holds for Belfast, highly qualified talent will be at its heart. Indeed, Queen's University Belfast has been instrumental in the region's many transformations. It's a world-class Russell Group university, ranked 8th in the UK for research intensity and 1st for spin-out companies and knowledge transfer partnerships. It is respected as much for its dedication to teaching as for its commitment to research and innovation. Incidentally, as Bombardier has benefited from Belfast, it has also invested back into the region in a virtuous circle. For example, as many of you know, Bombardier has funded the Bombardier Chair in Aerospace Composites at Queen's University Belfast and the Bombardier Royal Academy of Engineering Chair in Composites Engineering at Ulster University, as well as collaborating in the Northern Ireland Advanced Composites and Engineering Centre. So what is really remarkable is how many similar stories we could tell here in Belfast. In researching this talk, I discovered, for example, that Allen and Overy, one of the world's largest and most respected law firms, is disrupting a staid legal industry by locating more than 400 legal services staff in Belfast instead of in high-rent premises in central London. And just last month, they announced a partnership with law firm Baker & McKenzie, which also has a major presence here, of course, to create a new legal innovation center at the University of Ulster. Citigroup employs more than 1,500 people in Belfast with its local headquarters in the Titanic Quarter. Talat Pribon, the global financial services firm, is moving into City Key 2 across from the quarter. The London-based financial services firm FinTrue makes the case for their 2014 investments in Belfast as if the writers had an advance copy of this speech. Keywords like talent base, stable, loyal workforce, education sectors, and talent and skills jump off this slide, at least to me. And I think these quotes underline the single biggest contribution that universities make to their host regions, their nations, and indeed the world more generally. Institutions of advanced research and higher education are in the talent business. A well-educated, skilled, and entrepreneurial labor force is the bedrock of a dynamic and resilient urban region. It's clear to this audience, of course, that educating human capital is the most important thing that universities do. Educating students is by far our most important form of technology transfer. But we should also consider other forms of technology transfer. Much of the research conducted within our institutions ultimately finds its way into the marketplace through a variety of channels as measured by things like technology licensing agreements, patents, startups, partnerships, and other markers of commercialization. Queen's University is a shining example of this. It was among the first to support and foster startup companies and commercialization in the early 1980s, and it has been a leader in the UK since then. As I mentioned earlier, Queen's is first in the UK and Ireland in the revenues of spin-out companies, first in the UK for knowledge transfer partnerships. Its track record is well known, including global companies Keynote and Andor Technology, which was acquired by Oxford Instruments a few years ago. Similarly, the University of Toronto is Canada's leader in startups and commercialization, and we rank among the top handful of institutions in North America on these metrics. Entrepreneurship and innovation often make disruptive, industry-changing contributions to local and national prosperity, a disruptive force that is, somewhat paradoxically, also the very hallmark of regional resilience. Let me move now to the second theme of stability. If our institutions' contributions to regional resilience and dynamism are too often overlooked or discounted, as I mentioned at the outset, Well, their contributions to regional stability and to local communities are too often misunderstood or misconstrued. Town and gown relationships are easily caricatured with stories of the ivory tower, out-of-touch faculty members, and privileged, sometimes destabilizing students. The truth is actually quite different. To borrow an expression from the retail sector, universities act as anchor tenants for their host regions, stabilizing and building local communities, both figuratively and literally. First and most obviously, institutions like Queen's and the University of Toronto generate substantial economic impact within the region. A recent study by Universities UK estimated the impact of Queen's at more than £1 billion annually. A similar study found that U of T contributes approximately 12 billion Canadian dollars annually into the economy of the province of Ontario. Given exchange rates and relative scales, these are similarly impressive figures. So a university's presence generates substantial local economic activity, including employment and revenue for nearby businesses of every description. That same Universities UK analysis found that economic activity directly generated by Queen's has created a total of over 10,000 jobs in the UK, including, of course, the more than 3,000 jobs right here. Universities also keep local property and rental markets stable and buoyant by ensuring perennial demand from faculty, staff, and students. And there's another important sense in which institutions like ours should be regarded as anchor tenants. They're here for the long haul, 170, more than 170 and 190 years respectively, and counting. And moreover, they're not likely to leave town anytime soon. By attracting faculty and students from afar, they also contribute to a culturally diverse and vibrant neighborhood. By their very nature, they tend to welcome newcomers and propagate new ideas and tolerance and inclusion. Indeed, there's growing evidence that the most talented, creative, and entrepreneurial members of the labor force, those who generate opportunity and prosperity, prefer to live in urban settings that offer a high quality of place, exactly the kinds of settings that universities help to create. Many of these stabilizing effects are challenging to quantify. However, in a paper presented at the 2016 Royal Economic Society Conference, Anna Valero and John Van Reenen from the London School of Economics looked at local GDP data from more than 1,500 regions in 78 countries. They found that the presence of a university in the region, and there were nearly 15,000 institutions in their data set, that the presence of a university in the region was significantly, positively correlated with faster regional GDP growth, better metrics of innovation, and interestingly, stronger and more favorably viewed democratic institutions. Of course, there's another dimension to universities' stabilizing influence that should be mentioned here: the positive local impact of outreach activities by our faculty, staff, and students on surrounding communities and neighborhoods. I'm sure that Queen's has its own well-developed network of campus community partnerships, but let me give you a couple of examples from the institution that I know best. University of Toronto dentistry students served 78,000 patient visits in their clinic last year as part of their education and training. Half of these patients were children or seniors, and almost 90% of patients had no dental insurance at all. This is Shayna, who's a member of our graduating class of 2017. You can see her in action here. She's getting ready to graduate in a couple of months. Another example comes from our law school. Downtown Legal Services is a community legal clinic and a clinical education program operated by the Faculty of Law at U of T. And here are some of the clinic's summer interns standing outside of their clinic. Services are free and provided by law students under supervision from expert faculty and staff lawyers. Around 140 students work in the clinic every year and offer services to more than 2,000 clients in criminal law, employment law, family law, refugee and immigration law, housing law, and university matters. Well, there are dozens of more examples that I would be very interested in sharing, but I'm even more interested in hearing about examples from Belfast, so perhaps that will come out in some of the discussion in a few minutes' time. This brings me now to the third way in which research-intensive universities like Queen's and Toronto propel regional innovation, prosperity, and reinvention. And that is, research universities are gateways. They connect their host regions to the world and vice versa. Let me spend a minute or two providing some wider context for this aspect of a university's contribution to its urban region. I would suggest that two powerful and contradictory forces are shaping the current geopolitical landscape. On the one hand, a movement to retreat from international engagement appears to be gaining momentum in several corners of the globe. The Brexit campaign here in the UK is a clear example. Whatever one thinks of Brexit, it's difficult to avoid the conclusion that the vote could be read from afar as expressing skepticism about international engagement and apparent enthusiasm for building barriers rather than bridges. Incidentally, you'll notice from this map that almost without exception, places that host major research universities voted overwhelmingly to remain. I'll return to this observation in a moment. Meanwhile, a little closer to home, in the United States, while it's still a work in progress, President Trump's vision of America's future appears to be based on America first and building walls, and in this case, literally. This issue of The Economist was published just a couple of weeks before the election itself. So there seem to be major forces in global politics moving us away from mutual trust, cooperation, and sharing on the international stage. At the same time, a second powerful force is also shaping our global landscape. The international community is increasingly facing challenges that are global in nature and whose solutions require international cooperation. These challenges, and you can see them here, things like climate change, international migration of refugees, health epidemics, poverty and global inequality, just to name a few noteworthy examples. These challenges cannot be met by working in isolation. This slide shows the 14 pressing global challenges identified by the Millennium Project associated with the United Nations. So how can the tension between these two competing forces be resolved? Against this backdrop, a university's role as a gateway to global networks, knowledge networks, business networks, political and cultural networks. This role has never been more important. By fostering collaboration with scholars at other universities around the world, universities generate crucial insights into the solution of international challenges. Moreover, the knowledge that is shared or discovered through these networks stimulates the production of new ideas, products, and services, both at home and abroad. Universities, I would suggest, are particularly well suited to lead this kind of global collaboration. You might think that Belfast's airports connect the region to the world, and indeed they do. This slide shows flights originating at Belfast International Airport and George Belfast City Airport. But these connections pale in comparison to the connections forged by Queen's University Belfast. So this map shows collaborations between scholars here at Queen's and their colleagues at partner institutions around the world. Each line on this map represents a collaboration that generated at least 10 publications between the years 2010 and 2015. Here's the same map for the University of Toronto, though here the publication threshold is set at 100 to account for our much greater size. In both of these visualizations, the way in which a leading university serves as a global gateway for the major urban region in which it is situated is immediately evident. And I think the combination of the two maps is even more striking. Here you can clearly see the role that major urban universities play in helping shape global knowledge networks. We can think of these connections as the globe's arteries, creating and circulating ideas, opening up opportunities, and fueling creativity and innovation. Well, why does all of this international collaboration matter? It matters because our local prosperity depends not only on the knowledge and experience that we generate at home, but also the knowledge that originates in other leading centers of research and innovation around the world. Universities and the urban regions that host them are gateways to these knowledge-producing and learning opportunities. They are critically important nodes in an interconnected global knowledge network, as one look at this map demonstrates. Participating in this global network is increasingly important for local, national, and indeed global prosperity. In fact, I would suggest that these are the research institutions, those dots on the map. These are the research institutions that will collaborate to find humanity's answers to climate change, international migration, health epidemics, and the other big global challenges of our time. And this isn't simply well-informed speculation. We see venture capital and other forms of mobile investment now seeking out these special nodal places and the opportunities that are signaled by their world-leading research, their deep talent pools, and their connections with other global centers of knowledge production and innovation around the world. So think, for instance, of Bombardier, Citi, or Fintru here in Belfast, or Thomson Reuters, Bayer, and Johnson & Johnson, which have all made major investments recently in research-intensive activity in Toronto for the same reason. Well, I hope I have convinced you now, as I move to conclusion, of the vital role that research-intensive universities like Queen's and Toronto play in propelling regional innovation, prosperity, and reinvention. Universities help create urban dynamism. They are recognized as sources of well-educated talent, creativity, entrepreneurship, resilience, and the capacity for places to reinvent their economies. They also bring long-term stability to their host regions, while at the same time connecting those places to the wider world. They've emerged as major drivers of local, national, and international prosperity. I suspect many of you may not have needed much convincing of this argument. In that case, I hope I've given you a few new talking points and stories to share with local policymakers and decision shapers. In that spirit, let me conclude with a thought experiment. Earlier, I noted that Queen's University Belfast was here for the long haul. But suppose we could uproot Queen's University Belfast and put it up for auction. Suppose we even left its extraordinary physical heritage behind, its beautiful buildings and facilities, and auctioned off only its intellectual capital, the faculty, students, and staff, their ideas and future discoveries that they represent, their partnerships, and the opportunities that they create. Suppose we put all of that up for sale to the highest bidder. What jurisdiction would pass up the chance to acquire it? Thank you very much.